Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Inside Energy and Utilities podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the news stories that grabbed my interest over the last week, which is the week ending the 28th of June. So nearly July, time flies. So the first story I wanted to talk about was covered in City AM, which basically states that Ofgem is to bring in new checks on energy suppliers. And in particular, more stringent energy checks. The article starts by saying the UK's energy watchdog will put in place more stringent checks on the country's energy suppliers after a spate of collapses over the last 2 years. I think we can probably look at the last 5 years of these spates, but of failures. But obviously, 2019 was quite significant. I think in total 24 suppliers went belly up in 2019 in one way or another. And obviously with the impact of COVID-19, the future doesn't look bright, particularly for many smaller suppliers. And obviously this comes off the back of not only the 24 failed firms in 2019, but obviously the failures over the last few years, and also the news that sadly 2 of the council-owned energy suppliers are being put up for sale. So it's a very tough environment out there for suppliers. It's been a tough environment for quite a few years, particularly with the race to the bottom of prices and hedging and fluctuations in wholesale prices. Makes it tricky for suppliers to navigate this landscape. On top of that, COVID-19 has seen a reduction in demand, and we can see some of these, even the bigger firms, going through layoffs and redundancies. OVO Energy and British Gas were in the news recently for this. So it will be very interesting to see how this year plays out. I think these new checks are welcome from that point of view. On a personal note, I've worked for many suppliers, particularly with some of the smaller ones. I think they are, they have a very tough sort of fight on their hand. And looking at this, I don't know if more stringent checks are needed or that instead more frequent checks. I've always felt that lighter, more frequent checks rather than the sort of big audit, but more frequent checks could provide a better picture of overall supply performance in various areas. So that's one sort of personal sort of observation there. But it is good that Ofgem recognises that it's a tough environment and that they need to check up on some of the suppliers. So the second story that I wanted to cover is EDF. It states EDF is pleased that Sizewell C plants are cleared for the next phase. And this is by eadt.co.uk online. And Sizewell C, obviously the big nuclear plant, has moved a step closer. Proposals were cleared for the next stage by the Planning Incorporate. So the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government has deemed this proposal to be satisfactory. So it will move on to the next stage. And the next stage now will include the public being able to examine relevant documents related to Sizewell C. So that's going to be interesting to see how that develops. So the firm launched a proposal for a new nuclear power plant station on the Suffolk coast with the inspectorate in May, and with the government body being given 28 days to decide if the plans were satisfactory. And they have been. Very interesting to see how this is going to develop. And I believe that the next stage includes the public being able to examine the documents, and only after that will the final proposal be revealed. So it'll be very interesting to see that final proposal, but it seems like all systems are go for Sizewell C, and EDF is rightfully pleased with that. The next one is probably a selfish one, but it's very much of interest to me. And basically, it states that Drax is to trial this second CO2 capture system at Yorkshire biomass plant. And this story comes from Business Green. So Drax is to team up with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries for a groundbreaking 12-month carbon capture pilot at its Yorkshire biomass plant. Now, this is, for me, it's very exciting, and I'm keeping a close eye on this one. So Drax is aiming to technically become a carbon negative company within the next decade. Quite ambitious. And the way it's doing this, it's doing so by capturing CO2 emitted from burning biomass crops to create energy before storing that carbon dioxide underground via carbon capture and storage, or using it for its own industrial processes. And obviously the carbon negative piece here is from the fact that they are actually burning biomass crops rather than coal. So it's a bit more of a circular piece. Rather than just putting it out in the atmosphere, obviously. So Drax estimated that by fully implementing this technology at its power plant facilities in Yorkshire, it could deliver 60 million tonnes of negative emissions per year. So it's a very interesting one. Carbon capture and storage is high on my sort of focus list for a variety of reasons, and I think it has got a big place in the transition to net zero, from the point of view that we will have a lot of fossil fuels still on that transition to the net zero 2050 target. So if you can capture those emissions at the earlier stages on that transmission, you are reducing total CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. So I think carbon capture and storage has a role to play in the transition to net zero, and that's why I personally keep a very close eye onto this one. I'm very interested to see how this all plays out. And if I'm not mistaken, and I can't sort of see this, so I might have this wrong, but I believe Drax are aiming for within the next decade, but specifically, I believe by 2027. And to me, that those timelines always seem a bit far away, but actually they're not. If you think back to 2013, like that doesn't feel that far away. So 2027 for me is just around the corner. So if they can pull this off by that timeline, and I am doing this from the top of my head, so I might have that date wrong, but 2027 or 2030 is a very exciting and aggressive timeline. So very interested to see what comes out of this carbon capture trial at Drax. The fourth story is one that's also close to my heart. I probably also wouldn't be talking about it, but it is the news, and this is by Yahoo Finance, that British Gas is planning a cheaper digital only rival. I think it's going to be called British Gas X. So it is stated that this article stated Centrica would not comment, but it's expected to give more details in July. And obviously this comes off the back of redundancies, and particularly where the parent company Centrica said that it would cut around 5,000 jobs over the next year. The article also states that a test website for British Gas is already up and running, and it says the service is designed for the digitally savvy customers, with everything being done online. So, having worked for a number of suppliers, including probably the most successful challenger supplier and now mainstream supplier in overall energy, I always keep a close eye on the energy supply, or a close-ish eye on the energy landscape, energy supply landscape, I should say. And this is interesting. I honestly don't know why the big six haven't done this years ago, in all honesty. Essentially, this has challenger brands have been eating the lunch of the big six for probably nigh on a decade now, and for me, this is a no-brainer. It allows energy companies to or the big six to start trialing things, doing different things, using different CRM systems. If it doesn't work, you haven't really lost anything. You can look at new ways of working. So for me, this really is a no-brainer. I think this website is aimed to be completely online and self-service. I would probably use this if I was, in a British Gas decision maker. I would use this to do a lot of testing and gather a lot of feedback. I personally don't know if I would have called it British Gas X, because I think people would still associate it with the brand and still have the expectations of a big six, where what they're trying to do is move this to an online proposition only. So for me, that might confuse things. So, if it was me, and again, who am I? But if it was me, I would probably have called it something completely different. So instead of British Gas X, I would have called it X Energy or something like that. But it is very exciting. If successful, it's going to be interesting to see how other suppliers are going to look at this and how they're going to respond to this. For me, this space is so fascinating, full stop. It's going to be interesting to see in the next decade how the big six will respond to the challenges from some of the smaller suppliers. It will also be interesting to see how what we've seen is some of the early disruptors being disrupted themselves. So new players doing different things. Octopus Energy obviously having a big success, and the way they've changed sort of models, and particularly how they use their IT sort of capability. Bulb doing things differently to an OVO Energy. So very interesting to see this landscape evolve. For me, it will